Welcome to Splunk Talk.
A Splunk podcast that's all Splunk and no junk. I'm your host, Birch, here with co-host Hal. This is season 2, episode 34. And we'll soon be joined by today's guest, Sanford Owings, who will talk to us about Splunk virtual cores. Before we go any further, let's check in on everyone's month. How have you been, Hal?
I thought you were going to roll to commercial.
Let's roll to commercial.
First word from our sponsors.
Yeah. It's like when you watch a show and they just show the intro and then immediately go to commercial. You're like,
yeah. I'm sure there's a VPN or something, insert, VPN vendor here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. How have you been?
Been doing all right. I mean,
yeah.
Since the last time, I think we had a bunch of holidays.
We have had holidays. Yeah.
So that's nice. I like to, kind of take a pause, take a breather, reflect on what's going on. And, I don't have any like list of predictions or anything like that prepared, but, it is interesting to see, kind of the world around us and think about work for a couple of weeks is nice too.
Yeah. Vacations are hard right now because we live in a time where it's like, do I try to plan something or will all my plans be canceled at the last minute?
Yeah. Did you know that a lot of those travel insurance programs, they no longer exist?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So if you try to book a book a vacation and usually it's like, hey, for this, if you check this box, we'll take another couple $100 from you, but we'll ensure that you'll have cancellation insurance. No, a lot of those have stopped doing it.
They stopped doing it. So if I were to go book a flight, it wouldn't spam me with all those. So. I can't imagine why.
Authoritative, never, but
yeah. Never say never. Speaking of never, are you in Doctor Strange's home?
Yes.
Awesome.
At this moment, I am, as you can see there, I am in the Sanctum Sanctorum.
Yes, the Strange-atorium.
Yes, the Strange-atorium. I think I'm pretty well caught up on everything MCU. I think I am.
I'm behind.
You're behind?
I'm behind.
You've got Hawkeye. You've got WandaVision was a while ago.
I watched that one.
Okay.
I did a little bit of Hawkeye. Wait, no, not Hawkeye. Something in the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Falcon. Yes. Interestingly, I heard that they originally filmed that and it was supposed to be about an epidemic that they then had to reshoot and edit.
Really?
To not be about that.
But
I'll just spread misinformation and we'll leave it to the internet to fact check us.
Yes. I would have thought that in some sense, past pandemic related fiction was probably wildly popular the past couple of years. Like a new level of interest. I mean, I've read a whole bunch of kind of that level, that type of fiction in the past.
Yeah. I've been playing a board game called Pandemic a lot. Yeah, unrelated to what's going on, but it's just a really fun cooperative board game.
What's going on?
Right now, just, different things at work.
Yeah. Well, what is going on with you at work?
Well, in the last bit of time, I've started to instantiate this thing called developer success. Mm-hmm. So I'm responsible for almost like white glove consulting, helping our developers be successful, working on some semblance of support, making sure our developers that provide their own support are actually doing that. And if they need any help staying on par, a lot of it is detecting patterns in terms of questions that come up. Mm-hmm. Or challenges that people face, and seeing what I can do on our product side to really solve that at scale.
Okay, awesome.
So it's been exciting.
Where does the community hang out for this area that you find yourself in? Are there spaces
in the expanded universe?
In the expanded universe.
Yeah,
no, I mean, so there's there's Slack, there's channels on our public Slack, stuff like that. The community.
Yeah, I'm primarily watching the app dev channel on our user groups and our developing Splunk, I think is the exact name. I'll have to check on our community channel. And my hope is to really use those more so answers.splunk.com, use a lot of that to create a more of a knowledge base where people can discover the answers themselves and not have to ask questions.
Yeah.
That's in addition to stuff that matures into being in our formal documentation and tools.
So is the scope of this, is it all Splunk Enterprise and Cloud, or is it, all products all the time, 24/7, including our observability stuff, our security stuff, because there's developer
Yeah.
needs for that as
Yeah.
well.
It's everything ultimately, but by far as this function figures out what its operating cadence is and like, well, how do we do the things we do? I'm playing in our expertise, which is primarily Splunk Enterprise /
Right.
Cloud. That's also just been like the biggest area of interest. But from
Mhm.
time to time, we get questions about Phantom, about
I was
SOAR,
actually about to
about
say Phantom because they
yeah,
actually had a really significant kind of developer / integration community prior to that
yeah,
acquisition.
yeah, and all of those SOAR apps are now on Splunk base as well.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
my ecosystem, if you will, that I am a member of,
Hmm.
consists of things like our Splunk dev, like dev.splunk.com, um, the community things you were talking about, SDKs, REST APIs, um, talks at conf and whatnot, um, and then yeah, some of those other platforms.
Okay.
It's all fair game.
Awesome.
Yeah. How have you been doing at work?
I have been doing very well. Very busy
Yeah.
trying to basically um, get the right things at the end of a software release project. And by
Mm.
right things, I mean I work on the pre-sales engineering kind of org. I mean, it's market strategies and tech solutions is the name of the org. And so what I'm trying to do is along the way, see that okay, do we have answers? Do we have training and enablement? Can we be successful helping customers get to the point where they understand what it is that we're trying to do and are want to do that whole mutually beneficial thing where we give you some valuable software and services and you give us money and everybody's happy because you get it. You see the value.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I see our guest has just joined our waiting
We have a
room.
guest. That's
We have a
awesome.
guest, so I'm gonna let him in. And here he comes. Now,
Eventually.
this gentleman who's joining us today, he is one of the smartest people I know. I'm sorry, Hal, you used to have that title.
Mm, mm.
You gotta bring it up a notch.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I will not compete in this contest.
yeah. I'm glad we are all definitely using virtual backgrounds because none of us would be pathetic enough to have a rainbow real life background or a Doctor Strange real life background or a dorky universe of Splunk and Star Wars background. Definitely all using virtual backgrounds.
No, no, I'm actually in the Sanctum Sanctorum. I thought that was clear. I'm
Now
sorry.
I'm trying to remember how to turn that off because all you really see is my chair.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Uh,
fine. I was the point of that was to mock uh my lack of hiding my dorkiness.
I
oh
feel
no,
like
you
I'm
just
not
get to
hiding
see my
anything.
organizational skills. Actually, I'm sorry, my wife's organizational skills with the bins behind me. They're actually color coded so that they can represent a pixelated scene.
Hmm.
Oh
So
wow.
like some virtual sun over there in the corner and white puffy clouds, and then the ones down low are dark and green, like representing the earth, the ground.
That is very clever.
So
I definitely would
yeah,
not have thought of that. Guaranteed.
no,
That's I like
not
it.
my
That's
strength.
I would like to know what is going on with your chair. I have seen this in other meetings. It looks like
Oh,
you're being eaten by a spider.
yeah, pretty much. Hold on. So this, it's gonna be a little vertiginous, I
I'm
think
getting
maybe, but like,
Whoa.
okay.
so there's 3 monitors, and it's on a device.
That's crazy.
It's got
Whoa.
you can raise this and lower this. Hold on.
We legit just went
You can
into
get in
like
and out,
yo MTV
and it'll
Cribs.
tilt the chair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's neat. So what?
And
What
then
types
out
are
that way, which you can't see today, I could get peekaboo versions of visions of Matt Rainier, our local 14er. Yeah.
Wow.
Decent,
what
Do
is it
decent
that
you
you're
picture.
typing on?
struggle when you have to go on site somewhere and you're confined to a tiny laptop screen after that setup?
No, because to answer Hal's question, what are you typing on? That's my laptop is in my lap. So I've been along. I mean, we're all old school here. I mean, I think we've had to go through like whereas 17 monitor was huge. So for a long time, I've just used virtual workspaces. And so I've even got that set up on my laptop. So I forget it's the spaces functionality on the Mac. So I have a space organized for email and for word processing and PowerPoint and code and stuff like that. So I've always tried to be, or I've always kind of had to be a little bit organized. Like the notion of everything scattered on a desktop would drive me insane. So when I'm on site with working with a customer or whatever, I just switch between virtual workspaces.
So what about Flight Simulator? Have you tried that out?
Yeah, I haven't tried that out. I have a couple games that I can play on here. The PC, the chair is a Win 10 PC. And so I've got Steam and stuff like that. But the only things I've tried a wraparound version of some shooter, I think, and then a wraparound version of Skyrim, I want to say, but not a flight sim. I haven't tried that yet, but that'd be cool. A buddy of mine, it works for Meta in the Oculus division and has a gaming rig with a seat and a chair like this and a steering wheel and pedals and everything to race. He plays a Assetto Corsa with a VR rig. So I don't know how it serves without the VR rig, but you could do a similar thing with monitors or something, I guess. Like you probably get a pretty good field of view in there, but I haven't tried that yet either.
Do I spot Legos behind you?
Yeah, that's a partially assembled Millennium Falcon. My children love Legos. I have 2, 6 and 3. The 6-year-old will build, and she is good at it. She will build a set. Interestingly, a plug for American Girl. American Girl partnered with, I think, Mega Blocks, which are Lego compatible to do a bunch of sets, and their instructions are actually better. In that, when you're placing, let's say you've got a big plate piece that's the start of your build and you're placing blocks on it to get started on the foundation or whatever, those will show you the footprint of where your new block should go. So then in addition to showing you the new blocks you need for the step, like you need a 2x3 tile or a 1x4 brick, whatever, it'll show you where on the base plate you should put them with highlighted colors. So little blue dots or little red studs to show you where to put them, which makes it easier to find where you have to go with each step. Whereas Lego instructions, you have to count them.
Yeah.
You're like, 4 over and 3 up,
rows in, like gridding. Yeah.
But I will say this: the new Lego app, the recent generation of sets, like you can get instructions online, you can get PDFs online of all the old build manuals for all the old sets, but the more recent ones are animated and have, like, you can rotate the build and like see where it's supposed to go and flip it around and in 3 space, which is pretty cool. She doesn't quite get into that as much. She just wants to build and stuff. But the 3-year-old is the destructor. He wants to build stuff, but that usually involves disassembling all the pieces and scattering the elements of the set to the 4 winds. So that bit of sending pieces to oblivion is a bit disheartening. I have to quest to find the pieces to build the set again. So, and Birch looks frozen. Welcome back, Birch.
I understand. My kids are mostly past the Lego age, and it's sad because I don't want them to ever be past the Lego age.
Yeah, I know.
We've been doing this for how many years? And I think that's the first network disconnect, despite being hardlined.
And actually, during
Well,
our prep, mine disconnected also.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, fun.
So Sanford,
Lepore, Dan Lepore was in a meeting the other day, and he just stopped moving
Mhm.
and tried to stop blinking so that it looked like he was frozen. He was just being silly.
Oh,
I
is
thought
that
that's what
the
Birch was doing for a
the
second,
modern
but then you actually were frozen.
is that the modern equivalent of wearing like fake glasses to a meeting? Now is that you?
yes, I'm looking over to see if like I can.
No, what you really got to do is get the motion blur and have
Oh
the
yeah.
motion blur freeze you mid-frame.
Yeah.
There's probably somebody creative has done that with a filter for the video
Yeah.
input.
Sanford. Yeah, go ahead, Hal. Do it.
I was
How
going
about
to do
you?
what you were about to do.
Yeah, you're gonna do what I was about to
Okay,
do.
fine.
Do it up.
Sanford, hi.
Hi.
So
Okay.
tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what did kind of led you into your journey at Splunk, and then we'll just kind of talk about what you've been up to.
I like to call it your orange story.
Yes.
You said orange?
Yeah,
not
because
orange, but
it's kind of like an origin story.
I've never been an Oompa Loompa, so I don't have an orange story.
Well, that's part of your background is that you've never been an Oompa Loompa yet.
There you go. Right. So, as we kind of discussed a moment ago, like I've been doing computery things for a very long time, and so I started in a computer science education in like 1992. I started working with computers for money in 1990 while I was still a senior in high school. Fast forward to joining SendMail Inc., the company to commercialize the SendMail MTA and put a nice GUI on the wrapper and everything. Joined that company in 2000, shortly after the dot-bomb implosion. And then during the course of that work, we were trying to produce a monitoring solution for that product to track the behavior of your MTA, how many messages you sent, had spent a lot of time on a homegrown solution. Eventually, with the recommendation of a colleague, David Maislin, actually, we brought Splunk in 2010 to be the reporting solution under the hood, an OEM build of Splunk. Gerald Kanapathy was our PS consultant. And shadowing him in his second week on the job was some squeaky voice kid from Kentucky. That'd be Brian Wooden. So then
there's a real all-star cast right there.
Yeah, a little bit of a fun one. And actually a fair number of SendMail alums are at Splunk. Joe Fitzpatrick was here for a while. He's now at Cribble. Nick Philippi.
I didn't know Nick.
More names I can't remember at this point, but there were quite. Eric Meckler was a SendMail alum. Like that. So anyway, then 2012, they downsized the engineering organization. I was let go. I reached out to my Splunk contacts and said, "Hey, you guys interested in having me do some dev work?" And they're like, "We might have you do some PS." I'm like, I've done PS before. Okay. At the time, I was just living in Jersey, so I was then under Maddie as my PS manager for doing work on the East Coast for a while. So I had joined Splunk in 2012, that is. And I'm the longest surviving PS consultant. But I have a week of seniority over Steve Johnson, rather. But there are other long.
It's like twins who hold that one is a minute older than the other.
Right.
What month did you start?
March of 12.
Oh, that's a month and 7 days before the IPO.
And
you are correct, sir.
I have y'all by 30 days, and Steve Johnson, I guess, by 2 weeks.
Nice.
Oh.
Okay. So you've been doing professional services. You've been implementing, consulting. Are there any kind of notable things over the past slight handful of years that were, epic? Like, did you have any projects that you can kind of talk about in terms of, I mean, you can't talk about customer projects per se, but what were some just highlights of that?
Oh, I bet you had to do a lot of like fake clustering in the 4.3 days.
Uh, Thankfully, no, like not a lot of fake clustering. I never got to deploy that fabled HA license. The fun one for me personally was sort of like the Fire Brigade origin story. So I had a customer who we were just checking DF, doing kind of standard. My for a long time, my finger memory, my nervous typing tick was DF. And like, wait a minute, on server 3, the Splunk partition 75%, but on all the other 7 servers, it's only 30%. Well, that's strange. So I started noodling and writing a couple of searches to figure out what's going on. And we had the DF metrics from the TNX, and like, that's weird. Long story short, it just ended up being like a wake up moment, like, hey, we kind of need some visibility into this stuff. Some visibility into like what's going on with disk and what's going on with buckets. And I followed that rabbit hole way down. I passed Alice on the way and waved, said bye. But that's what ultimately became Fire Brigade. Some
Fire
fun
Brigade
customers like
for people who aren't familiar is a very successful and effective app that's been on Splunk base for longer than I've been alive.
I think a lot of the functionality has largely been subsumed into MC and CMC now, but
But the
proud
whole
of that
point there
proud
is
of that
that the
aspect as well.
reasons that it exists there were because you found and faced those in the field. And it was like, hey,
Yeah.
this is what's happening. Hey, product, check out the solutions that we've built in the
Yeah,
field because we had to.
sometimes seeing what you had to build, like you were just saying, how is enough to create, like, motivate product to just do it. Yeah, never thought about that.
Other notable things, like I've done PS work in, well, the unfortunate thing. So like my PS career prior to Splunk, I got to do a fair amount of world travel. I got sent to Europe. I got sent to Japan to work on a big project. I spent multiple months in the UK on a big project. So those experiences were kind of fun. I don't quite have the same level of travel going on with Splunk PS because Splunk is a larger org and has people all over the world and stuff like that. So there are consultants already in MIA, and fine, I guess I can't go. But I did get to do a training gig in Sydney, Australia, and leverage that to bring my wife out for a week in Australia, and then visit the Coral Sea and the big Great Barrier Reef and stuff like that. So I have had some memorable memories in that train. But as far as like gig wins, I think I must be I'm going to claim CRS syndrome. I can't remember those now.
Would you say, you said with Fire Brigade, first of all, Fire Brigade, are you still frequently updating that?
No, haven't upgraded in a while, to be honest. I've just been subsumed with other projects. And I don't, so part of the virtue of, part of one aspect of living on the East Coast, I was living in northern New Jersey in a town called Morristown, which is not too far outside the city, but far enough to make it a little bit of a trip. So I would be working for doing gigs in the city, like Financial District or Wall Street or Midtown or whatever. And so I would take the train. So I had my laptop on the train for an hour's ride or whatever. And so I was just, in that time, I was, double productive because I was cranking out stuff, working for the customer on site and then hammering out stuff on the way home. I don't work that way anymore. And so as such, some of those projects have kind of gathered a little dust. And so Fire Brigade is due for an update, honestly. I put a smidge, like the tiniest smidge ever of Python code in there, in order to trigger. There's a saved search that runs once daily around midnight to populate all the dashboards. Well, if you don't have that run, the first time you install it, all the dashboards are blank, user complaints, blah, blah, blah. So I wrote a tiny bit of Python to trigger that script if it didn't find results. But of course, now that doesn't pass. It's not Python 3. So I don't think I'm current compatible with the current version. So I think what I'll do is just, release a 10th anniversary special edition or something, and new with updated graphics and now no Python.
And an unnecessary cameo by Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And I'll, CG Han Solo, so he like walks over the back
over the tail. Yeah.
The worm.
And then Jabba will go.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Destroy our childhood. So,
well, it's more like
it wasn't
recent,
but it wasn't ours
childhood.
to destroy. That was George Lucas's work. It's his work to tinker with, and
sure.
But I'm gonna remember, the same way that you imprint on like your first kind of pizza you get regularly, or the first hamburger, or like, whatever, the first thing. Oh, computer went dark. Woof, weird. I'll still remember the original print, so I have it in my head.
Cue the "I Will Remember You" song in the background. So okay, so Fire Brigade. But one of the things I was going to ask is, when you were talking about the motivation of Fire Brigade and how you you went deep, you went past Alice and everything.
Alice on the way down, yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's like part of your identity, is that like, if you want something to be figured out, you can always give it to Sanford, because he will take it all the way to the end and find the root cause or find the right answer or whatever. Would you say that's an accurate attribution?
Yeah, I would say I have, if you're talking in the context of, let's say gaming for a second, like I am kind of a completionist, right? So I like to kind of map out all the other aspects of everything. So just the other day, somebody asked me about the default line breaker being new lines. And they're like, "What? I don't see it in system default." I'm like, probably hard coded. Let's email Amrit. Yeah. Whoa. Amrit's like, "Whoa, I didn't notice that. Yeah, it's hard coded." So eventually we'll find a way to get to the root of it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of how you dive deep into things, this was sort of a backward setup to what you're doing now, because I think you've positioned yourself maybe organically as like the subject matter expert for all things SVC. So how about you tell us
I wouldn't
about
say
that?
I wouldn't say that. So SVCs, should I do the background?
Yeah, let's hear all about it.
Yeah, sure. SVCs, for those who don't know, is just it's an artificial currency, SVC, Splunk Virtual Compute. So it refers to the amount of compute resources required to do a thing. For most folks who are using Splunk in a Splunk Enterprise in like a standard license model or on-prem, what we do is we charge you for the amount of data you consume, the amount of ingest. But there is a new pricing model available that's primarily available to cloud customers, but they're rolling it out for, I don't know the state of the rollout, but I believe it's made available to on-prem customers as well, called workload pricing, where you pay instead of paying for the amount of data you consume, you pay for the amount of compute resources you consume, where the compute resources you consume are made up in part of ingest, like how much data you consume does take CPU resources, but that is not the whole story. So
I bet that means that, like, if I'm a company where I have a ton of data that I do want in Splunk, but I don't know how much I'm gonna like need it or how valuable it's going to be, I'm kind of paying for the value now, because the things that I'm doing with that data, the searches, are probably more taxing compute wise, whereas the ingest is more flatlined and modest.
Right.
Is that like the play there?
Yeah, so I think this stemmed, I'm not sure like the origin story of SVCs in terms of where they came from or why, but I think part of it is to recognize that complexity in the environment. So it's not a simple model. It's not simply ingest. There are some customers who are ingesting a trickle of data, but searching it millions of times over. And so there's a balance to be struck between those two things. There are other customers who are ingest heavy and barely search any of it. And so just trying to find a balance between those things. So the SVCs just represent the the meter on how much compute is used to do all the things. So whether that's data model acceleration or searches or reporting or run dashboards, whatever, SVCs represent the amount of compute power required, the rough sizing of the cluster or the instance to get that work done.
So do we, let's say that we have someone that is pretty familiar with the infrastructure of how Splunk works, right? Maybe they understand, they've run Splunk Enterprise on premise for a long time, and they're moving to cloud, and now they're basically hearing about or SVC pricing. Can they make some assumptions based on what they know and have that generally bear out? I mean, for example, indexing used to basically use a core of an index server, and the rest of that busy server, those were searches. Can you make some assumptions like that generally bear out, and kind of how do you, as an engineer,
Like how do you size it?
How do you get to that end goal?
Yeah. So both good questions, right? So first, let me tackle the how do you size it, just because that's a quicker answer, and then I'll dive into house. The sizing of SVCs for folks approaching cloud goes through a whole sort of process in the pre-sales process to kind of figure out, is it bigger than a bread box? And what we start with is the ingest, because that's, as Hal pointed out a moment ago, we kind of understand the CPU usage of ingest a little bit better, because we know we've modeled that for a long time. We've run that way for a long time. And so the ingest, we kind of had like a model of like a base core for just running Splunk, and then for every 3 megs a second, or every megasecond of data coming in, you expect another core, and then after that you have headroom for searches, right? So ingest still forms the basis upon which we size for SVCs. If a customer comes and tells us we're ingesting 60 terabytes and we were going to do a bunch of this and we're going to run ES and run ITSI, that's where we'll begin. We'll begin with this notion of, okay, how much ingest? And I think cleverly, what the pre-sales team have done to kind of to make the model work for them is then take the sizing and multiply by a scaling factor depending on the workload. So we know empirically from running on-prem for a long time that enterprise security has a bit of overhead for the data model acceleration piece, and we can approximate that. And so what eventually happens, Hal, is that we have the calculations that are done on the pre-sales side relate to how much ingest, and then we say, depending upon what you want to do with it, you can service however many you'll require X many SVCs to service that, right? So if it's just pure ingest and just consume, eat data, no search, then you can get like 25, I think it was 25 gigabytes per SVC, right? Whereas when you flip it around and you have an intensive application like ES or perhaps ITSI, your sizing goes down to like 8 or 10 gigabytes per SVC. Now, I'm probably misquoting those numbers terribly, so let your let your pre-sales team navigate that. But that's the basic gist, right? You can service more or less data with the core amount of SVCs, and then you adjust that number up and down with a little tweak, right? So what we see though is the unfortunate truth, at least from where I sit. Now, you have to understand that by virtue of my seniority and my experience in PS, I don't get handed easy stuff because that's left for others to do. I get handed the tricky ones, the sticky customers, the intractable problems, things like that. And so as a result, my exposure and my experience is skewed. So I'm not going to say this is representative, like the little asterisk, your mileage may vary. But what we have seen, what I have experienced customers having is growing pains, right? So they say, well, we worked with the pre-sales team and we sized everything, but now why are our SVCs so high? Why are you telling us that we need to pay more money, right? Why are we saying you're using more resources, or why are you saying that our stack is degraded, or our performance is degraded because we're using more compute? It
sounds so offensive. Degraded.
Yeah, degrading. I know. So they, customers are regularly saying kind of what's the rub, And the truth is that, first of all, nature abhors a vacuum. So whenever you give somebody a green field with some resources, some extra compute, they're going to use it. They're going to build a dashboard with 100 panels, or they're going to do dense searches where they don't need to, or things like this. And the sizing, that's when the sizing details of that pre-sales work, that engagement, really kind of come to the fore. Like, oh, we didn't do a really good job about sizing this, or your organization is growing like crazy and you're using a lot of extra stuff, or your ingest has increased significantly, thereby taking resources from the shared pool or something like that. So it has been a rocky road for some customers getting adjusted to that SVC model. But I will say that the models are being refined. Even the calculations themselves for existing customers are being updated and refined to adjust for, kind of real world, where the rubber meets the road experience with SVCs, since we have more time in service with that model now.
So from a technical perspective, the umbrella question is, what is an SVC? But like from a technical perspective, like, so how is it measured?
It's it's a kind of an abstraction for CPU seconds. Like if you've ever watched the boot up of a Linux kernel and it says your CPU has 85 BOGO MIPS, bogus MIPS, right? And it's an abstraction for how much CPU time is required to do a thing. If you've ever looked at the job inspector, there's a section in the bottom in distributed mode where you have a search head and indexers. The bottom has a section about the time, the work done by each of the indexers that return results. And there's one part of it that's wall clock time, like how much, 5-6 seconds, whatever. And then there's another part that's CPU
time.
And usually they're 1-to-1, right? But sometimes they're not. But even when you calculate like the time it took to run the search as a whole, like this search had spent this much time doing stats and whatever else, all those things are broken out by CPU time. And so that's effectively what gets measured by the SVC calculations, is how much CPU time was involved in doing a thing. Again, it used to simply be, you've ingested this data, it's on disk, you can search it, go for it. You might have a dashboard that is your coffee dashboard, right? Because it means that it's time to go up and head to the break room for another, start another pot, because it's going to take a while to run all that. Well, now, unfortunately, the truth is that that's going to cost you money. It's not simply, costing you time. It's going to cost you money as well, because those searches are likely to graze the threshold of costing SVCs. To be clear, not every search is going to do that. If your search is relatively quick and you're doing just a little ad hoc thing, and it's not going to cost you anything at all. But if you are routinely running I have a customer who's one division in the customer want to run a week-on-week comparison of a 1-hour time slice. And hat tip to memory of David Grasso, built the time wrap command that eventually got rolled into product. The customer is doing a 30-day search, time wrapping that on a week basis, and then filtering to just 1 hour. So they're doing 1,440 hour calculations, hour summations, hour aggregations,
but only needing one
to get to 4. Right?
Yeah.
To this week, last week, the week before, week prior.
Oh, okay.
So that becomes, while an elegant pattern, they're using like literally time wrap into tail, because they only want the last 1 hour row.
Constantly doing it.
It's an elegant solution. But in the SVC model, it's expensive.
And explain what is that elegant solution for? I've got some examples, but I wanted to hear what are some examples of what customers.
Sure. So as mentioned a moment ago, the customer wants to see a week-on-week comparison of a metric. So let's take response time of an API call, right? So this is homegrown code. This is API code. So Java or some other language where they're instrumented the platform so that they're watching how long certain operations take. Is the database slow? Is the fetch, customer record thing slow? Whatever. They're profiling their application in order to make sure that it's not degrading and that their customers have a good experience.
Okay.
Great. So now they want to see in a dashboard, they want to see a comparison of the value for this week, the value for prior week, the value for the week before that, and the week before that. Okay, cool. So what are they doing? Well, that's this.
Okay.
For this past 60 minutes, I need this 60 minutes and the same 60 minutes a week ago and prior. So what they're doing is they're just casting a wide net. They're doing 30 days. They're doing the whole calendar month. And then they're using the time wrap command to wrap 1 week on the other, on the other, on the other. So they're folding it all backwards like a, multi-fold, page in a book or something.
That so now I think what I was getting at, and I think I heard it. So thank you. Could be any metric at all whatsoever.
Oh, sure.
And
yeah.
When you do this search against log data, then it becomes computationally very expensive.
But is the rub here that they're doing a ton of calc for a ton of time slices that they're then tossing away at the end?
Yeah, it's the combination of things, right? So yes, Hal, you do touch on an interesting point that metrics could be involved here. I mean, we could use the mcollect to gather this stuff and
m is kind of
lowercase m,
but
yeah.
Yeah, sure.
But
yeah,
measurement, that could occur anywhere, but most often, especially in this customer's case anyway, it was log data. There might have been a timestamp that you're computing something from, or maybe there's a literal delay equals lag equals time to respond equals number in that log message. Okay.
Yep.
So what do you do when you have that expensive situation?
You find a different way to do it. And that's currently what I'm embarking on, right? So again, the time wrap solution is elegant, but as Birch pointed out, you're doing a lot of extra work for no gain, right? You're throwing away work because you calculating all these extra slices that you're then discarding. That's not inherently bad, but in the SVC model, it will raise your SVC utilization. So in an effort to kind of curtail that and bring it back, what we've been doing is finding other ways to do a search. So there's a few things that I thought of and a few things that I've had to discard. So because we know that we're looking at a single hour at a time, so the clock on my corner of my computer says 12:05 Pacific. So if I want to do the last hour, then I need most of the hour of 11 o'clock plus the first few minutes of 12 o'clock, right? So if I know that ahead of time from my time range picker, that sets some values in my search. If I use the add info command tells me the bounds of my search, the info min time, info max time. I can then drop that into a macro or an eval and do some work to say, I want to use those magical date fields that get populated when the data is ingested by Splunk. That's an automatic setting that defaults to true that says, if I parse your timestamp, I'm going to save the values of the hour, the minute, the day of the week, etc., while I process it into epoch time, the way Splunk stores time.
Right. So there's additional fields that are each atomic section of the timestamp, the month, the day, the year, the hour, the minute, right?
That's exactly correct. So now that I know that, if I can say, well, because I want most of 11 o'clock and a little bit of 12 o'clock, what if I said, I want the date underscore hour field, which is an index field, interestingly, to be either 11 or 12, right? So then I pull only back, even though it's a 30-day search, I'm leveraging index field
by like 1/12 of every single day. Yeah,
exactly. So I fetch all that back. Now I get a lot of nulls in that time wrap, but I don't care because those are nulls for things I don't want anyway. Right. So I'm saving myself a bunch of work. The caveat, though, is that first off, as I mentioned, that's a default parameter. That parameter defaults to true. You don't get those fields if the data coming in is already an epoch. For example, consider the squid proxy, which defaults to logging an epoch time. You won't get those fields on that data. Second, it's localized to the time zone from which the data was parsed. In the customer's case, the customer search head, they work in Eastern time, but they have affiliates all over. The data itself from data center 1 is logged in Central. From data center 2 is logged in Mountain. So now my values start to expand, right? I have to say if the date zone is the 6 o'clock zone or the -6 zone or the -7 zone, and it's this and that, then it starts to just get too wonky, and that solution fell apart. Okay, so what's next?
So just before you continue going, I've got a list here of some best practices I'm hearing from you. Number one, going in a stack rank. The most recent was I used to always evangelize that, like, because of that geography, you could have data centers in different locations for geographic availability. It behooves you to have all of them on, let's say, the same time zone, like UTC. So just set it all to UTC, and you've also eliminated a lot of these headaches. Would that be a dividend from doing that?
I would say so, yeah. So if you've got everything in UTC, then at least the date zone field, which is again, that time zone offset that's parsed when timestamps are parsed, would be consistent. And then you could leverage this mechanism to use the date hour. I want the 11th hour of the day, the 12th hour of the day, what have you. You'd have to adjust it mentally for, okay, so I'm in Eastern time, but all that stuff's in UTC. So I want 5 hours ago, no wait, 5 hours ahead. And I also
cue my rant about how our whole world should just switch to UTC and get rid of time zones, but I'll save that for another podcast. The other best practice I'm hearing, and we can come back to this, but like from the moment you brought up this use case, it hit me that, like, I bet existing deployments that convert to SVC have growing pains because they have legacy searches and stuff that are not that performant. But if you were a brand new deployment using this model, you would probably be using best practices right off the bat. It wouldn't be so challenging. It's that transition that's hard, which goes to say that I'm growing very fond of SVC because it feels like it really creates an incentive for best practices, using like post function on your dashboard so you can consolidate to one base search, using summary statistics where available, like all the kind of best practices, cleaning up and not having such sloppy searches. And in the end, you're aligning your sort of payment plan. The financial burden is now aligned with the performance. So like if you have a poorly performing platform, alliteration score, you're going to end up paying for it. And yeah, I don't know. It's just a cool correlation of motivators that, like, not only should we make this run well because it's a better experience for us all, but it's going to save us money, or at least give us more value.
Yes. So I think that's a great point to underscore there, Rich, because one of the things that, I will confess to you that I didn't quite approach it. I didn't mentally get to the space yet of the notion of a best practice. I know that's a torch you've been carrying for a while, but I agree that it does encourage some practices to help write searches in a more optimal way. I will say though, I don't think that just because you're a new platform, you decided you want to try this logging thing, you're going to try Splunk Cloud, and it happens to be an SVC stack. I don't think you're necessarily going to know what those best practices are, the best ways to write those searches. Unfortunately, that's still knowledge that's not well surfaced, and that's something I'm trying to do. I mean, when I'm doing that with this customer, the specific work I'm asked to do is provide optimization, right? Help us reduce the SVCs, find the tall pole and whack it down. And so you touched upon some notion of best practices like dashboards, consolidating searches, using summary indexing, even CAPM metrics for HAL might be useful in this case for this customer, right? So rather than having to pull all of these data pieces from a log it's literally like a string that has MS attached at the end, so they have to rex it. They have to use rex to get the field value out in the first place, and then do the stats on it, etc. doing a one pass mcollect to convert those to metrics and then searching them however many ways they want to do later would be a tremendous performance win. You gain efficiency by, thinking about your thing and doing your post-processing. One of our larger customers in Splunk Cloud have undertaken an extensive engineering work, and I mean that as a software engineering, they're not building a bridge, to be conscious of and aware of their search patterns, to organize their summary indexing in a way, and their dashboard searches in a way, and their named saved searches in a way so that they are effectively sipping search SVCs. They ingest a ton of data. They're one of the largest ingest customer stacks we have, but they sip their search SVCs because they've deliberately been very efficient about it. So maybe, it stems even from way back in the beginning, right? They're optimizing their log platform so that they can use things like the term operator to be very efficient in their searches. And then they're using summary indexing to perform the aggregation one time. And then using dashboards that are built in the summaries, right? So overall, the search behavior is very efficient. By contrast, the customer that I'm working with is also a very large ingest customer in the top tier of ingest size, and they have not yet undertaken that engineering effort to optimize those searches, and their users have kind of gone wild. Their users found multi-search, multi-report, time wrap, pipe tail, as well as map, the map command, and are keeping our data centers nice and warm.
You're reminding me how fluid data is, because like all the way starting with, I'm a new customer and I have this model. I bring the data in. Well, maybe I wrote some searches on day one. I just didn't know any better. I'm new to, experience, whatever. They work fine. They come back fine. But once you load up that system and you have more data, or you have more people operating in that space, or more searches, the things that may have worked.
15-second search, for one person,
it may not scale.
You've got 1,000 people.
Yeah. And then even thinking about like the optimizations that you're doing when you're talking about like summary indexing or metrics, like, well, there's a cost to doing that. It's not like you should just make everything a metric or make everything a summary indexing, because that has a cost too. So it's like, if there's enough demand on these things, there are ways to make it more efficient. Kind of like, it doesn't make sense to have a post-process based search on a dashboard with one panel.
Sure.
Why make the investment in complexity?
It's like a physics problem. You don't get to destroy. There's no entropy here that eliminates the processing time, but you do get to move it, or you can change the problem. You look at it from a different angle. And
well, sure. Consider the paradigm shift with the introduction of Smart Store vis-a-vis enterprise security, right? So enterprise security does exactly what Hal just suggested of shifting the processing time. Enterprise security dashboards all rely upon T-stat searches that then draw the data from accelerated data models. So the data model acceleration, the compute that happens to do that summarization, happens in the background while no one's looking. But when time comes to chase an incident or look at your daily security posture, you're loading on a dashboard that's going to load very quickly because you're doing T-stats against those things. Now, introduce Smart Store. Smart Store will say, hey, you haven't touched this data in a while. I'm just going to shove it on the back burner over here. If you need it, I'll get it back. But just, it might take a minute. It's microfiche, right? For those of us who remember that in the library, looking through old newspaper clippings. So now if you build a dashboard with a T-stat search and say, oh, just T-stats, 90-day T-stats, it's fine, it's count, whatever. That can once again become expensive if you have to retrieve that data from your S3 store. So there are some paradigm shifts that do involve, or that will require users and customers to kind of reassess the way they look at their data. And so we discovered an interesting one in the process of this that affected cloud customers only, but there was a change to the behavior in T-stats because first it was giving the wrong answer. So if you T-stats to do a count or something like that against a summary index, which has the summary indexing keywords PSR SVD underscore prestats reserved field names, then it would actually give you the wrong answer, right? So somebody said, hey, this gave me the wrong answer. So the correct fix is to examine those and deal with the records properly and so on and so forth. But in the process, it changed it to an ad hoc search where tstats is working in mixed mode between an ad hoc search and the summary searches, leveraging the TSIDX files. And as a result, turn that 90-day tstats that you expect from ES for enterprise security, for example, to be nice and fast, is now counting each and every event.
Mixed mode being both indexed and unindexed summary of it.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. So
it's both an accelerated and not at all accelerated search happening.
Not at all accelerated, right?
I want more of those. I'm going to create a new thing called not at all accelerated searches.
Yeah, and two, another aspect of that paradigm. Sorry, Hal, I'm going to talk over you. I apologize. I couldn't hear you very well because I'm busy blabbing. But if you are just saying, I need a list of hosts to pick from a form, if you do index equals foo pipe stats count by host, that's what we would refer to as a dense search, right? Because you're going to go through every event and then figure out the host.
I thought it was because you were dense for using it over metadata.
Well, no, and I'm going to get to that too, if you'll permit me to do this little
permitted.
This is the scenic tour to get to Birch's Vista best practices Vista. But if you have that dense style metadata search, that's going to be more expensive from a compute perspective than a tstats or metadata based search. So you can use the pipe metadata search command to quickly get the list of hosts just from reading these tiny little .data files that are in every index bucket. Or instead you can read, you can use the tstats against the index files and be a lot quicker. So there are efficiencies, there are ways to do things more efficiently when you're in this model, whether you want it to just be fast. And Birch, we touched on this before, but it's not only just about optimization, but it's also about user experience. So if I want something to be quick and snappy, I'm going to do it this way and do some things. And as it happens, most of those things are going to improve your experience from SVC as well. So one of the things we talked about best practice would be to just consider the way you use the data. So, why are you doing index, why are you trying to get the list of hosts? Maybe one of your best practices, maybe one of your things that you want to adopt from a customer standpoint is provide a metadata catalog to the people who are going to do it. Like I've seen discovery searches where index equals foo, what are my field names? Effectively, they're just doing an ad hoc search to discover field names or field values and what it looks like in the raw, so that then they can run a search and do a stat. So they're kind of double dipping on the search because they don't know what's there. So if you know what's there ahead of time, that's part of what can help write more efficient searches. You have this metadata catalog. And so if you're looking for this, run this search.
Now, sometimes you mean literally the metadata search command. But I imagine
exactly
a bunch of items in a toolbox there that could help build that catalog.
Yeah, absolutely. So tstats is one of those, knowing the way that the index files work. Like even just something as simple as the term operator with regards to like the dot character, right? We always talk about searching IP addresses, how Splunk will split them by the dots to find where 10.117.22.44, where 10 and 17 and 22 and 44 all occur together at the same time and happen to be in that same order with dots in between too. There's faster ways to do that.
So I know we're coming up on time here. I guess, as you explore this world of SVCs and doing the optimizations, and we juxtapose that with the fact that like this is fluid, your usage of the platform is fluid. Every new bit of data that comes in, every new group that comes in, and even the optimization that opens up and unlocks new capacity, all of that creates fluidity because the behavior of how you use the environment changes. You introduce new use cases because you have capacity or so forth. Like even when Sanford gets engaged, in a customer's deployment to make optimizations. The second you leave, that entropy comes back, right? So what are kind of your what kind of like advice do you have for people? Like, how can they stay vigilant in the quest to keep performant in their environment?
Yeah, cool. So that's where the notes that I scribbled ahead of time, because I wanted to remember a couple things. Like you were talking about some best practices. I would strongly recommend anybody who is already in a workload model or perhaps considering a move to one to implement the workload management, right? So in the cloud platform, you already have the necessary infrastructure there to use workload management. Your mileage may vary if you're running it on premises. It's only available in the Linux OS environment, I believe. But workload management allows you to put guardrails. Hey, don't run index equals star. Or if you're going to run index equals star, we're going to slow play that search so you don't, heat up the office, right? And so start with workload management, put bounds on searches, prompt people, help people write better searches by saying, don't use index equals star. Tell me what index you want to look in. You might put caps on the execution time of a search. You might lower the priority of a search so that it doesn't consume as many resources. It might take longer to run. It'll eventually run for that user, but then
And
that
that's all
becomes
with
a motivator.
That's all with workload management. Like it's basically the handcuffs, or like the not container, but like the boundaries that this workload can operate in.
Let's be nice and call it a walled garden. I don't know. I mean, yeah, but exactly right. There are constraints that you place on searches that people can run. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Noted.
Do workload management. Consider profiling your stuff, right? So customers who are already in workload pricing have a dashboard available to them in cloud monitoring, the CMC, cloud monitoring console, to look at SVC usage. They can report on it daily, hourly, what have you. Look for users who are using high searches, figure out why. It can prompt a learning experience. I mean, we've talked about how I tend to rat hole on things. I will look at a search and say, why is that search costing so many SVCs? I've got enough experience now. I mean, the bulk of my experience, not just the last few months working with SVCs, but I have an understanding now of what things tend to be more expensive, and I can articulate that. But as you say, Burgess, it is fluid. It's not that it's every environment that runs a search this way is going to have this problem, but these problems do tend to surface more often than others, right? We see this when you run a search this way, it tends to use more SVCs. When you run a search that way, it tends to use more SVCs. I might consider another thing to consider would be like a wall of shame, like call out leverage that CMC platform, but then say, who are the top 10 users? And maybe have a talk to say, hey, what is it you're trying to do with your data? Maybe we can find a way to do this better. Maybe there's a better way to search with clever use of like the term operator, or Richard Morgan did a great talk about T-stats and the prefix operator. There are things you can do with key equals value logs, just using T-stats alone, which is actually a pretty slick.
I used to also say I'd encourage people running deployments to look at like a wall of shame, look at what searches are using the most CPU time, because the people running those have already presented themselves as your future power users. They're clearly passionate and doing things of high value. So if you can bring them into your house of, hey, here are great ways to be more performant, you've now democratized that knowledge. They can share it with others.
Right. And be your champion with that within their team.
Yeah.
And if, I've seen a lot of copy pasta within the environment I'm working in. So one person, one clever person built up a bunch of dashboards, and then everybody clones it. So I've seen clone, right? So you want those individuals, those leaders, those thought leaders within the groups to be doing things the right way.
Yeah.
So like train the trainer, go identify those people that are interested in. Yeah, that's awesome. So any final thoughts before we let you go?
Nah.
Nah.
I mean, I think
47 minutes, and then those are my thoughts.
Well, no, I mean, honestly, it reads like the last paragraph of your 5-paragraph essay from grade school, right? In conclusion, SVC pricing affords a lot of flexibility with your cost model. It's not just solely related to how much data you consume now. But for some customers, that model will have a surprise. And so like, wait, I thought we were doing really efficient about the way we manage our data. If I was bumping up my ingest license, I'd just turn off a forwarder, or I knew I was in debug mode, I'd throw away some logs I don't want. That's what's more difficult to do with search. You don't throw away searches you don't want per se, because chances are they're run for a reason, right? I will say there was some copy paste between data center 1 and data center 2, but we eliminated that stuff pretty quickly. I would say instead, SVC allows a possibility for much more efficient use of the platform, and perhaps even ways to get at your data even better. Like, oh, I didn't know I could do that way. No longer will I dump this into a spreadsheet and run my calcs. I can actually do the calcs in Splunk now that I know the efficient way to do it, right? So I think it does afford a capability for broader democratization of your data, to borrow that word once more. But it does involve a little bit of pre-thought, and it does involve a little bit of work.
Cool.
Awesome. So,
and I'll write stuff down as soon as I can.
Thanks a lot for joining. Spend some time with us, Sanford. I learned a lot. Hopefully, the listeners did, and we appreciate your time. And talk to you again soon.